Welcome to another Vintage League video here. Today we're looking at Vampire Soldiers. So yeah, this is Vampire Soldiers, and like it says on the tin, we're running a bunch of creatures that are both vampires and soldiers at the same time. And the reason is because we have two ways to cheat in our Vampire Soldiers. Our first one is Preeminent Captain. And this is a 2/2 first striker. When it attacks, you can put a soldier card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped attacking. So it's a nice way to cheat in soldiers, and especially if they're really high mana cost and powerful, like Markov Enforcer over here. When it enters, it's a soldier. It's a vampire and a soldier, or another vampire. So you play a second one or one of the vampires in the deck. It fights a creature an opponent controls, and then whenever a creature that Markov Enforcer deals damage to dies, you get a blood token, which lets us, later on in the game, create some card advantage there by turning cards we don't want into cards we do want later on. That's a pretty cool one there, pretty strong, can take out a lot of creatures. Usually it's also going to be able to kill a Psychic Frog unless later on in the game Frog gets enormous, but usually it'll kill most of the creatures we see except for Atraxa. The other big vampire soldier we're playing is Licia Sanguine Tribune. It's a first strike lifelink 4/4, and you can pay 5 life to put 3+1/+1 counters on it. So right away, first turn it can be a 7/7 if it's swinging. And I'm not sure if we clarified here, but just to note, they come in attacking. So in Preeminent Captain swings, the creature comes in tapped and attacking already, so it's pretty nice. So it's going to come in swinging, attacking right as a 7/7 right away. And then it's got lifelink, so it'll, in first strike, get that life back. And then we've also got Dusk Legion Duelist, which is another vampire soldier in the deck. And this one also has an ability where if you put a +1/+1 counter on it, you draw a card. So you can put that in with Preeminent Captain as long with the other soldiers we have. Then we've also got Sorin, Imperious, Bloodlord, and this can put all of our vampires into play too. So it's got that -3 ability there. You can put a vampire card from your hand direct on the battlefield, just kind of like a show and tell ability, but it's got that other 2 abilities as well. So the first one, for its +1, you can give a creature Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. And as a vampire, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you target our Dusk Legion Duelist here, then you can draw a card with its ability, which is quite nice. Also, its second ability, you can sack a vampire and you deal 3 damage to any target and you gain 3 life. So later on you can sack your Dusk Legion Duelist or any other creature if you really do need that, extra 3 damage there at some point, or to kill a Lurrus or something important like that. Another synergy with Dusk Legion Duelist here is we've got Seneskull of Sun. So this one's another way of putting +1/+1 counters on Dusk Legion Duelist to draw cards, and it's also a nice filter engine later on in the game. It's possible that we'll have some cards that we don't want mid-game. We can discard them and get new cards while putting +1/+1 counters on our creatures. And it's also a nice sack discard outlet. So let's say we've got a Reanimate in hand and a Markov Enforcer in our hand. We can discard the Markov Enforcer and then reanimate it. So nice little outlet there, as well as being just a nice engine and some synergy with the Dusk Legion Zealot there. We've got Boromir, which is a soldier, so you can put that in with the Preeminent Captain here for free. And also has some nice abilities. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana is spent to cast that, counter that. So that stops Moxin, that stops pitch cast Force of Will, that stops pitch cast Force of Negation, that stops people trying to cast spells for free off Bolas's Citadel. Stops, breach lines. There's a lot of stuff in Vintage. It's quite nice. And you can sack it to get Indestructible and the Ring Tempshu, which are also, solid abilities. In addition to this, to stop the no mana spells, we're also playing a Vexing Bauble, it's restricted, and 3 Voidmirs. All of these cards are stopping your opponent playing your free spells. So if we can get these down early, ideally turn 1, it lets us play our spells without them getting Force of Will or Force of Negations. And it can really stop our opponent if we get this down on turn 1, especially on the play, where they're not able to play their Moxen afterwards. But we can, because we play our Moxen before playing the Voidmir. And we have ways to ramp into that. We've got 3 Ancient Tombs here, and then the full suite of 0 mana lands to help us be able to play the Voidmirs nice and early. We've also got the very strong Grief Reanimate package in this deck. If you're not playing Force of Will, you need ways in order to prevent your opponent from winning the game. This is Vintage after all, very quickly, ideally on turn 1. So in addition to Voidmir and Vexing Bauble and Boromir to slow the opponents down, we've also got the Grief plus Reanimate package here where you can pitch Grief and then reanimate it right away to take 2 creatures from your opponent. We can also cycle our Troll of Khazad-dûm and reanimate it, which is still good. And then to tie the deck together, we've got Barrowglyph. Barrowglyph, when it connects, mills cards equal to the amount of damage it's dealt, and then you get to put a creature in your hand. So let's say you've got a Preeminent Captain or a Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, and you're trying to find vampires to put into play, or vampire soldiers to put into play. Barrowglyph's a good way of helping you find these and to really pull ahead here. And also just a strong card on its own. It's a pretty good, not played too much in Vintage. I think it's a little underplayed in my opinion, but it's a big player in Legacy for sure. And in this deck, very good at pulling together the creatures in your deck that you want. And then just to round this off, we got a couple other things. Demonic Tutor is just a staple in black decks here. Chains of Mephistopheles is a great one where we'll stop our opponents from going crazy with drawing cards. We're not drawing any cards in this deck. So that's a one-sided effect here that we just get all the benefit from. Oh, and one other thing to mention, Licia's ability here. It says it costs 1 less to cast for each 1 life you gain this turn. And then Barrowglyph has lifelink, so this swings for 4 or 5. That can make Licia 4 or 5 cheaper, and then it makes it pretty easy to hardcast. Licia's a little expensive on Magic Online. I only went with 1 here, but you could definitely play. It's legendary, so I wouldn't go crazy with it. But I think you could definitely play 2 Licias in this deck if you want to try out something similar at home. I think between the Preeminent Captain, the Sorin, and then the life gain from the Barrowglyph, it's actually pretty easy to cast Licia, even though it looks like it costs 8 mana in this deck. I think that covers all of the cards here. We've just got a lot of fast mana. Our deck's a bit on the higher mana curve here, so we're using the broken Vintage artifacts to cast our spells. Mana base, pretty standard. Black and white cards plus the 2 trolls, 3 Ancient Tombs to ramp us, and then Saga's an additional threat and a way to find Lotus. Lotus or Soul Ring, middle of the game, are other ways to hard cast the Markov Enforcer and the Licia. Just getting a Lotus or a Soul Ring, if you already have 2 red, is just an easy way to cast these more expensive things. Sideboard, you know, swords for Mono White Initiative. You can bring them in against the Lura's control decks as well, or Bug, Leyline in the Void, and these 3 here for Dredge. Null Rod for the Lura's PO combo decks and the Jewel combo decks, artifact-based combo. You can also bring in the Pithing Needle for those because it hits the 1 ring, which we're not playing in here. And I think that covers everything. It's this is Vampire Soldiers. Let's go to round 1. All right. round one here. So we start out by playing a Voidmere, and it gets countered. Our opponent's pitching a Gitaxian Probe with Force. Not quite sure what they're on yet. They didn't reveal Lyris though, so a Tinker deck or a Doomsday kind of come to mind. Let's see what they do. Alright, so they go Mox Land and cast their Demonic Tutor. That's fine. We try to play another Voidmere, and our opponent doesn't like that. They force a will this again, pitching Flusterstorm, but they've used a lot of resources now. They've stopped us, obviously, and we don't have a lot going on, but they only have one card in hand, so let's see what they do. And they Vampiric for an Ancestral Recall. That refills their hand. That's pretty strong. So we've got our Preeminent Captain in play, and from the intro you probably know what this does, but when this attacks you put a soldier from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And Markov Enforcer here is a nice soldier to put into play tapped and attacking. Alright, so they're going to ponder, and then I'll just click through the replay normal here. We got some really big damage in there, so we're threatening, can't do anything with the Reanimate, but we're threatening to win next turn, so our opponent has to go for it. Time Walk's a good start, and they got 4 cards in hand. At this point, between the Street Wraith, we know that they're Doomsday. Doomsday is the only deck that wouldn't reveal Lyris and instead play a Street Wraith. They go for the Brainstorm, they just can't pull it together. So it got there, just starting out with some prison pieces that our opponent had to force of will, and then we were able to swing through with some big damage here. Alright, let's go to game 2. Alright, so we're on the draw in this game. Our opponent starts with the Undercity, and they decide not to keep that Doomsday, which is scary. We've got a pretty reasonable hand here. We can Grief, and then we can follow up with a Voidmere potentially. So our opponent did not let us Grief. They did Force of Will, pitching the Ponder. We pitched the Troll here, but then we did get a Voidmere down, and we've got our Urza Saga down as well. Opponent goes for the Ancestral Recall here. Very strong. And a Ponder as well. So they're probably sculpting pretty well, but we have the Voidmere, so they're not able to play their Moxen or their Lotus. They got to play a bit more of a fair game here. So our goal is going to be to try and pressure them as much as possible, their life total. We used our Sorin to put in our Dusk Legion Zealot for free, and next turn we can try and put a counter on it and draw a card. Our opponent's got a very big Murktide, so we gotta fight through that. Our creatures are all smaller. Now, Sorin can give the Dusk Legion Zealot Death Touch and drawing a card, so opponent's cracking it there to stop us from drawing a card and giving the Dusk Legion Zealot Death Touch and Lifelink. So we're just going to play our Barrowglyph and pass. Opponent's got some choices here then. So they've got 4 cards in hand. They've got the Murktide, and they're going to go for the Doomsday here. That can grow the Murktide slightly, but it does take 8 life off of them, so it's important for them to try and win this turn, and they can't do that. They realized after they played the Doomsday that they can't actually win because of the Voidmere this turn, and apparently assuming they don't have another Fatal Push in hand, they're not going to be able to kill one of our tokens, so we can just untap Swing All, and win here with the with just an attack. So obviously we had some nice, like game one, we had some nice threats here, but Voidmere did a lot of work on this one. All right, shout out to Voidmere. Let's go to match 2. Alright, match 2 here. We are against Red Hot Phil, who's really strong regular vintage player. Come on, Noto. You can do it. Try this again. Here we go. They play a variety of different decks here, sometimes bizarre, sometimes combo. Let's see what they're on today. So they're on Dredge. They got the play, and they got turn 1 Hollow 1 Bizarre, and they've got 2 Dredgers in the graveyard, so that's a very hard start for us to beat. Game 1, we don't have our graveyard hate in. We've got 4 Leylines of the Voids and a Pithing Needle, a Soul Guide Lantern, and I think a Cage to bring in, so that's a lot. But as you can see here, we aren't able to stop them, and even if this Varaglyph resolved, it wasn't going to do anything, but that's okay. So we can bring in a bunch of cards there. We got the 4 Leyline and the Voids, which are really strong against Dredge. We're also bringing in the Gravedigger's Cage, the Pithing Needle for Bizarre, and the Soul Guide Lantern. So let's go to game 2. So this game, we start out with the Leyline, and that's great. 7 with the Leyline is where we want to be. We don't have a ton of action, but we can end of turn cycle the Troll and Reanimate it. That at least gives us a clock as well. Opponent just goes for Bizarring, and they don't find a Hollow one, so that's good for us. We just cycled the Troll. We try and reanimate the Troll, but they, in response, Noxious Revival it, putting on top of our library to basically counter the Reanimate, which is fine. We're holding the Cage and the Saga in hand because one of the ways out of this, the main way for Bizarre, is Force of Vigor, but that Force of Vigor destroys 2 artifacts and enchantments. So putting out one of these just means that when they find Force of Vigor to get killed, what we want to do is wait for them to kill this and then play the other ones afterwards. And they're digging here. They're not finding Hollow ones. And they haven't actually Force of Vigor anything yet, so I just played the Saga just to try and get a clock on board. We really do need a clock, that's important. They wasteland us, that's okay. That's a clock, it's a very good draw. And we're going to, we got a Varaglyph here. Let's see. Second Baraglyph probably locks up this game, which is quite good. So they didn't find the Force of Vigor, and even if they did, we were probably okay because then we could follow it up with the Cage. So it's nice having both the ley lines in the deck as well as secondary pieces of Graveyard Hate. So we got game 2 here. Let's go to game 3. Okay, so we start out with a ley line again on a 7. That's really good. Opponent used Serum Powder once, and then they lost 2 Force of Vigors. So that's really good for us. I mean, they only have 2 more Force of Vigors in the deck, and then the hollow ones, which is what they're going for here. We just playing out some of our mana here. In retrospect, I don't like that. What I should have done, like I said last time, when they have 2 artifacts and enchantments to blow them up. So since we can't play something, I should have just held these 2. But that was a mistake. That's okay. Goes back to our turn. And then we got the Voidmere. Now the Voidmere is really strong for Dredge, against Dredge with the ley line. So part of why I think some of our deck is probably pretty decent against the Bazaar decks is that the Voidmeres and Vexing Bauble means that they can't force a Vigor, the ley line of the Void, and they can't play a hollow one for free because it gets countered. So our opponent their opponent just concedes there. They can't force a Vigor, the ley line, through the Voidmere, which would just counter it. They can't play a hollow one, so our opponent just locked out of the game there. So strong win. So 2-0 now. We beat Doomsday, and now we beat Dredge. Let's go to match 3. Alright. So round 3 here, and we know we're against Lurrus. Let's restart this one. We're going to restart this game because the first turn of this game is where I lost it, and I'll show you what I did wrong. We're going to go a bit slower. Alright, so they revealed Lurrus, and then we've got a turn 1, what should be a turn 1 Grief into a turn 1 Preeminent Captain or Boromir, almost guaranteed. Well, not a bad hand. So we're going to Grief them, pitching the second Sorin. And we see Fatal Push, Force of Will, Probe, Orcish Bowmaster, Time Walk, Undercity Sewers. Now, for some reason, I sat here thinking for a minute, and somehow I convinced myself that if our next play was Mana Crypt, that they're not going to Force of Will it. So we don't have to take Force of Will. And they don't really have any way to get Revolt right now for Fatal Push, so they can't actually blow up our 4-drops, or 3-drops right now. So I talked myself into just taking one of the other blue cards that's not Force of Will, and then they probably won't Force of Will the Mana Crypt. Now that, I don't know why I thought that. Our opponent is a strong player, to do well at I've seen on Twitter that they'll events play this game a lot. I should have known that I really need to take the Force of Will here as the best play in order to make sure that we can carry out our pretty strong game plan here. But I don't do that, and I get really punished for it. So what happens is the Force of Will pitching the probe after we took the time walk on the crypt, and now we can't play anything. So that was it was a bit silly from me. Definitely regret that one, but it was a good learning moment there. Just got to respect your opponent sometimes. We draw a land, luckily though, that helps us get back into the game. And they've got a wasteland, but they're a little stuck on mana too. Now, if we would have had our crypt in play, we could have put our Markov Enforcer into play this turn. Instead of being able to put our Markov Enforcer into play this turn, we do nothing, and we let our opponent start developing their board. We can play our Sorin, but that gets met with a Spell Pierce that they drew. And they found a wasteland and a strip mine. So now we're back to being stuck on mana. Can't cast that because we don't have black right now. That took us off that with the wasteland and the strip mine. And the third piece of mana denial here locks this one up. So they started with nothing in their hand originally. They only had the Undercity Steward, so they found all three of these in the first couple turns here. I guess also with the Brainstorm, which was strong. Definitely a way to keep us down. Our deck has a bit of a higher mana curve, as you can see. We could reanimate something, but we're at such a low life total now, it's probably not even a good idea. And we just don't get there, so we would have had a fighting chance in this one if we would have just taken the Force of Will. So that was my mistake. And it's a good reason, one of the reasons why I want to do these replays is to take a look at these games again and then figure these out, try and improve. Go to game 2. We're on the play this time. So we had a pretty strong turn 1 there. We, with the Mox Ruby, using the Troll to get the Scrubland. Play the Scrubland, play the Mana Crypt, and then we played the Preeminent Captain, but our opponent also had a strong hand. They were able to Force of Will it, pitching their Dig Through time. They target us with the Vexing Bauble, draw a card, play a C. We try and cast our Demonic Tutor. That gets met with the Force of Negation, pitching the Snapcaster Mage, and we play our Zealot, our Dusk Legion Zealot. This card doesn't do a ton on its own, but if we can find a Sorin or an Inti, then it gets quite good. And our opponent's got a Frog and an Orc, but they don't have any more mana, so what we really need is one more red source to get up to 6 mana and double red and cast our Sorin, our Markov Enforcer here. We don't find the red, but we find the Grief, which is not bad. So we cast that, and then our opponent's got one card in hand. They're just going to pitch it to the Frog, so we don't take it. And it's another Frog. Not a bad one to take. They're going to make the frog fly, so we can't block, and that makes sense. Now we still need to find a red source here. We do not find a red source. They buy their Luris. And now we can try and put in the Markov Enforcer. So not only does that kill the frog there, but it also gets us a nice blood token. The blood token then will let us later on discard cards to draw cards. We've got a big 6/6 in play, our 3/2 Menace, the Dusk Legion Zealot, which can draw cards with the Sorin. Another vampire that we find will combo with the Markov Enforcer. Any other vampire that enters also gets this trigger. And Markov Enforcer fights as well. So we find another Dusk Legion Zealot, another Markov Enforcer. We can fight, or the Licia. Opponent gets a cage, that's fine. I do something silly here. So, Sorin's only, or I guess I do it next turn, but we do it. So Sorin's only at 1. I think that game ended a little quickly on this replay. I think it did play out a bit longer than that. I end up sacking the blood token to kill a Sorin. I think I drew another Sorin, so that was fine. But yeah, we did win this one. I do think that we lost a turn on the replay though, but you get the idea. We had a bunch of scary threats in play. Let's go to game 3. So I kept a bit of a risky hand on this one, and I don't regret it, but we have a bit of a problem here. So our opponent's got 2 lands in play. We can't really do anything here, and we're really soft to Wasteland with this hand. So we can play the Mox, the land, and the Bauble, and that means that if we find another land in the next 2 draws, so this draw per turn and the draw after that, if we find a land either of those draw steps, we can play the Sorin without it getting countered by Force of Will, Force of Negation here, and put in a Markov Enforcer, which is a really strong play, probably puts us pretty far ahead. If we do not find a mana source of any type on this draw step, or then a land specifically, because the Bauble will be in play one after that, our hand's quite bad, because if we want to do anything at that point, we got to fetch the sword that opens us up to Wasteland. Unfortunately, we drew a Markov Enforcer, which is probably the worst draw on the deck, and we just have to hope that our next draw is a land now. And they do have the Wasteland, so that problem has realized itself. And we draw a Chains, which is not a bad card, but in this situation, if we try and play it, they just waste us, and that's awful. And they've got a Frog. So I cracked the Bauble end of their turn to try and look for a land here. They've got 3 cards in hand. That's just going to start snowballing with the Frog. And I feel like we have to try and get this Sorin down. So since the Bauble's cracked, we can play the Sorin, but brutally, they've got a Daze to counter it. And now they're probably going to get wastelanded off the our useful colors there, yeah. And we don't find another land. And Psychic Frog does its thing of drawing cards every turn and just burying us. Unfortunate. I think if we find a mana source of any type that first draw, or a land on the first 2 draws, a good chance we are able to pull this one out, but did not happen. If you disagree and think I should have mulled out of curiosity, let me know below. I think there's definitely a case for it, but I thought it was strong enough to keep. Sometimes I think you can keep a hand that's, you know, worthy of keeping and still lose. I think that's just what happened here. So we're 2-1 now. Let's go on to round 4. Alright, so a bit of a tough one. We had to mull down to 5 here. But that we do have a turn 2 Barrowglyph. Opponent just goes Wasteland and no Lurrus reveal, so probably a slow mono white initiative start, which means that Chains is not a good draw, but we do have a Barrowglyph. And yep, they've got a nice turn 1 white plume, turn 2, I guess, white plume there, which we can attack into to trade with, but we don't actually have anything to take the initiative with. They're just going to go down the Lost Well and waste us, and they choose the Sorin with the Peacekeeper. And one downside of having Chains in our deck, it's good against most of the decks in the format, it's good against all the Lurrus decks, it's good against Jewel, it even has text against Bazaar, but well, some Bazaar decks. Dredge, I guess, if you can play it turn 1, but not after that, unless, well, game 2 it can if they're digging for a Force of Negation, Force of Vigor, but usually Chains isn't good there, but it's really bad against mono white initiative. So, not what we want to see. A lot of the strongest decks in the format, some of the ones that are good against us, draw a lot of cards, so it's a hedge. And we got some prison pieces in, but we're just way too far behind here, so go to game 2. Hopefully we don't mull to 5 this time. Alright, we only mulled to 6, and they've got a Chancellor, which means we can't so if they didn't have a Chancellor, we could do a cool play here. We've got 5 mana, which means we can use... Oh, what did I do? Alright, so we had 5 mana, which means what they didn't have a Chancellor, we could use 2 black on the Lotus and these 2 to grief, take one of their creatures and reanimate it. Since they have the Chancellor trigger, we can't do that, so we have to play the Plateau, then play the Pearl, paying the 1 for the Chancellor trigger that they revealed. This one, so they revealed this from their hand, which means our first spell we got to pay 1 more for, it gets counters. We pay 1 for this. Then we take the Still Moon Cavalier, but that does mean we can take the Still Moon Cavalier and reanimate it once we find a black mana source. So they go where the Chrome Mox and the Crocus, protecting themselves from the Chrome Mox getting Thought Seized or discarded in some other way. We got another Sword, which isn't bad, but that does mean that we can't reanimate. But since they introduced the initiative, we can take the initiative with Grief, get our Swamp, and then we can reanimate something. We got our Still Moon here. Still Moon Cavalier, really good against mono white initiative and against Esper, Lurrus, and blue black Lurrus control. It's got pro white and pro black, so mono white initiative can't deal with it. Esper Lurrus and blue black Lurrus have a really hard time dealing with it too. Some of those decks will play, blanking on the name of it, but it's 2 mana black, destroy all white creatures. That's really the only thing they have that can deal with this. Otherwise, it's just invincible. We're going to pump it, get some damage in there. They can swords our Grief, but they can't deal with our Knight. And we're just taking out the Knight there to prevent them from getting initiative. In retrospect, that might have been a bit silly because if they had something like Haymaker, like the Seasoned Dungeoneer, we get a little punish for it. But so I think I would take that one back if I could. But having the Still Moon Cavalier and being one step ahead on the initiative here, certainly, also having, you know, more life certainly keeps us in the driver's seat here, though. But if they find another Seasoned Dungeoneer, we could actually be in trouble. Alright, let's go to game 3. Animating the Still Moon Cavalier here, really coming in handy. And we're leaving in Voidmere on the play. So this is quite good against Mana White Initiative on the play. To get down turn 1, a lot of their mana sources are 4 Chrome Mox and then a full suite of regular Moxes, Lotus, Mana Crypt. We get that down on turn 1. That counters all of those and makes them really slow. But we don't want that on the draw. What we do want is Swords to Plowshares. That's really good against them. But Voidmere on the play is quite nice against Mana White Initiative. Alright, so we take a mulligan here, but we've got a hand where we could actually play a Markov Enforcer on turn 1. So I was hoping they would go for a turn 1 creature and then we would just eat it. They didn't do that, and they had a bit of a slower hand, so we got some options here. So I decided to just play the Barrowglyph out with the Lotus. Now they've got the Containment Priest, so they were playing around us having a Reanimate start here, and that does work, but we didn't have the Grief to go with it. They take out our Barrowglyph here. So I could have just taken out the Containment Priest there, but that's a bit of a slower hand. I wanted just to play the other thing first. Hopefully get more value from the Enforcer. But I think at this point, with no other threat on board, it's worth playing it. And we do get our blood token from this. And they have the third sword, so we lost our Enforcer, but we found a Grief, which is quite good. They had Archon in Chrome Mox, so we take the Archon. We can reanimate that next turn. And they play out putting the Chancellor on the Chrome Mox so that we can't discard it and steal it. This is the Chancellor of the Annex here. Can't actually play it, so they're just trying to protect it from us. Almost taking it and reanimating it. Now, they have a lot of draws here that could be scary, especially Seasoned Dungeoneer, so we're just trying to apply as much pressure as possible before we take too much damage. We're down to 4 here, so even if they find a blocker here as a creature, they have to double block the Grief, they have to hold it back, so we can't just swing for 5, we swing for 2, so it's a tough spot for them. So let's say even if they drew, you know, White Plume or something here, they can't actually attack because they have to be afraid of the Grief. So, good game. 3-1 now. We beat Mana White Initiative at the strong one. I think having the Grief Reanimate package and a pile of removal in here does definitely help, but Mana White Initiative is still one of the very scary decks in the format, so still happy with that win. Go to round 5. Alright, so our opponent revealed Luris here. They got their Luris. We've got a pretty reasonable start here. We can go turn 1 Vexing Bauble. I don't really want to play out the Saga. Kind of want to bait them into hitting one of our other lands here. Nice having a lot of lands against Luris control here. And they've got a Ancestral Recall, and they're able to also Force of Will the Vexing Bauble, hitting the with a dig through time. So we definitely look like looks like we're in trouble here after the Ancestral Recall. But we've got strong cards on our deck, and it looks like this is probably, it might just be the blue-black version. The blue-black version plays Fatal Push as their main removal spell, which means if we can get down one of our big creatures, like this Licia in our hand, or the Markov Enforcer, it's very hard for them to deal with those creatures. So we're definitely not out of this yet. Also Troll, it's hard for them to kill a Troll as well. They can kill a Barrowglyph, but Barrowglyph getting a lot of life is still quite nice against them. So I'm assuming they've got some removal or something in their hand here, so I'm hoping that we can just start by making tokens and deal with some of those, and then we can try and recover with the Barrowglyph. So they're just going to fly here. If they just eat the construct, they, 1, don't get the draw spell from the frog, and 2, they got to pitch a card to kill it, so it's kind of like losing 2 cards here, so they're just going to fly it. We make a token, and we swing. And we're going to start out with the Boromir here. The Boromir stops Force of Will specifically, so at least pitch cast Force of Will. So now they try to push it. We're just going to sack it to give the ring to somebody. So we've got a Barrowglyph here. We can play the Barrowglyph, and if the Barrowglyph connects, it's got lifelink, and Licia costs 1 less, like we talked about in the intro, for every life you gain. So Barrowglyph can help to cast Licia, which is quite good. Time Walk and Psychic Frog is definitely a scary combination there. And they keep flying their frogs, so he can't block them. Try and reanimate the troll. That gets countered. We get our Barrowglyph. They have another Force of Will. So although the frog's drawing a lot of cards there, definitely makes this tough for us. We can eat one of the frogs. They can bring it back with the Luris, but at least stops them from drawing a card and bringing back the Lotus. Sorin got countered. We can almost hard cast the Licia here. We've got 7 mana on the table right now. Licia costs 8, so any mana source will let us hard cast it, which is good. They can fly over it, but it's got lifelink. Can potentially stabilize us, because we do still have some pretty big constructs in play. We don't find a way to cast Licia, but we've got the Barrowglyph now, which potentially, with the life gain, can help us cast Licia. It's very hard to get through the this wall of Lurrus creatures here. We don't have a tremendous amount of removal on the deck game one. We've got Sorin, which can be used as removal, but only with vampires, which we don't have really that many in the deck. We've only got, what is it, 4, 5, 7 vampires. And then we've got the 6 Markov Enforcers. So we do have some removal in the deck. We could just draw a Markov Enforcer and kill the Lurrus. But we don't have infinite removal here, and we don't have a lot of evasion as well, so they're just kind of bricking us with these orcs here. So I think there's definitely a case to put some swords on the main deck. I've got the 4 swords in the sideboard right now. But I think this game showed that having a few more removal spells main deck probably does not hurt. But maybe some Bogart Trawlers as another land. Maybe 2 Bogart Trawlers to try and clear the graveyard. Or a Dauthi Voidwalker. Some of these things to try and stop this situation here of just recurring walls of Lurrus creatures. Bogart Trawler, swords, Dauthi Voidwalker, all I think pretty reasonable options. And our deck's a little soft. Pretty soft, very soft game 1 to dredge. I think having potentially something like Dauthi Voidwalker in the main deck as a card you can play and as a Demonic Tutor target as well. Definitely think a reasonable consideration. So we're in a bit of a stalemate here because they can't quite win because we have all these big lifelink creatures that they can't kill. But we can't get through their lines here as well. I take the negation here. One way we can win is just by drawing a Sorin. Sorin can plus to deal 3 damage to any target, so we draw a Sorin and we can sack the Licia just to hit them for 3, which would win on the spot. So that's why we're taking the Force of Negation here. I like their white bordered mystery booster, Urza Saga. And one thing to note here is that we're up on time, and this is only game 1, and Lurrus Control takes a lot of time in their games to get through them and win. So we definitely want to stay up on time here by a good amount. Like, we're up a full minute here, which is good. As long as that's the case, we don't really care how long it takes to win this game, because our deck can win very quickly. Our opponent's deck is a bit more dirtily. And we use the Licia's ability as a bit of a combat trick there. So they block with the frog. Before damage, we paid 5 life to put 3 counters on it, give it a 7/7 first strike lifelinker. So we were able to take out their frog, which was, I think, a big swing here. And yeah, opponent down a minute on clock here, down to 12 minutes. We're up to 21 life. And they're very much on the back foot here at this point. So they decided to pack it up. And their plan here is to try and win the next 2 games in 12 minutes. They decide that's more likely than trying to actually win this game in another game if this takes 3-4 more minutes. Like, they potentially, could find a time twister and win. That's kind of like they're out here as to find time twister with Workish Bowmaster, but I guess they're also down to 15 cards, so the other problem they have here is they get too low, they cast Time Twister. They could just lose. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, we do pack that one up. The life gain, the big creatures out of fatal push range, definitely helping us here, which is quite good. Let's go to game 2. I guess we'll take a mulligan there. We've got a bit of a slower hand, but we've got solid mana, and we've got plays we can make. So we got turn 2, we can play the Saga and the Dusk Legion Duelist. Or if we draw an Emerald, we can just play the Barrowglyph right away. And we get Daze, so that is a bit unfortunate, but we do have the Reanimate next turn, so we can start making Construct tokens and do the Reanimate. And they didn't have a Mox the first turn, so Daze puts them off of making Construct, so they're just going to try and be aggressive here. The double Reanimate's great, so our first one gets forced, and that's fine. We got our Barrowglyph on the second one. And they've got a frog in addition to their orcs, but they're a bit pressed on mana here. Our mana situation in this game is quite a bit better. Frog can obviously draw them out of this. That's kind of, what they're going for here. But they're just going to have to start chump blocking the Barrowglyph. The first one's fine with the token, but after that, you got to start chumping the real creatures. And that's a good one. That means if they find any Moxen, they can't play them. Boromir stops opponents casting spells without mana. So they have to draw specifically into real lands here. And they can fly the frog once, but then they don't have any other 3 in the graveyard. They have to start pitching stuff or binning stuff with the city. So they just bin the Sapphire because they can't play that through the Boromir. And we get a swing. That's a great draw. So they can't counterspell anything we've got right now because of the sword. So we can just use the swords to take out the Psychic Frog. So they go for flying it, and then we're just going to take it out. And they don't like their hand there. Alright, so we got that one. Strong win here against Blue-Black Luris. One of, if not the, probably is the top deck in the format. And we finished with a nice 4-1 there. So let's go over our matches quickly here. I'm going to grab these from the other side there. Alright, so we started out against Doomsday with a nice 2-0 there. Then we beat Dredge. We definitely soft game 1. I think there's a case to be made for some Dothy Voidwalkers in the main deck maybe, or some Bogart Trawlers to try and help with that. We won games 2 and 3, but we really do concede outside of, I guess, really strong starts. We do just concede game 1 to Dredge. So I think there's definitely a case to be made to make some changes to try and help the Dredge matchup game 1 against Toast. We lost that one in 3. I think there were some play mistakes on my part, which we went over. Like game 1, I should have taken the Force of Will. We got game 2. And game 3, I still think I'm happy with that keep. I think it's worth it. Just we have a lot of lands in our deck and a lot of mana sources in general, so we have 22 cards. We had 2 in the hand, so we had what, 20 out of 53 that we could have hit on the first draw, and then 14 out of what's left in our deck on the second draw. So I guess maybe it's a bit more iffy than I thought it was, but if we do find a mana there in the first 2 draws, we're in such a commanding position. I think was worth it. But if you want to mulligan that, I think that's okay. But overall, I think that matchup's not awful. I think we have a lot of tools. I think we're probably actually even to favored there. So I'm thinking that's okay. Mono White Initiative, we got the Grief Reanimate package and Swords and other removal. We definitely have the tools there. We did lose a game just by mulling and our opponent having a strong start, which can of course happen, but I'm pretty happy with Mono White in most decks where I've got the Grief Reanimate package. And then against Gonti, there we again, we did manage to beat the Blue-Black Lotus control, showing that we do have tools for that matchup. So I think potentially some Voidwalkers in the main deck. I think a second Licia. Licia, with all of these 3, you can put Licia into play pretty nicely. And Blue-Black Lotus control being one of the top decks, if not the top deck in the format, having trouble dealing with the high CMC creatures, I think definitely warrants a second Licia here. Most of these cards I were all impressed with. Dusk Legion Duelist wasn't particularly good. I think going down 2-1 would be okay for the second Licia. And Inti, again, didn't do too much. The idea is if you got a Void Mirror down and you draw one of these, you can just pitch it to get something better. Or if you've got a Markov Enforcer in play and a Reanimate, you can pitch the Markov to get something better. Something like that. I think there might be better options. I think there are some vampires that do a looting ability, so they would play nicer with the Sorin abilities here. Makes Sorin a bit better by getting some more vampires in the deck. So I think the main deck change that could be in the sideboard. The 2 Inti and the 2 Dusk Legion Duelists, I think those are kind of the flex spots in the deck in my opinion. Those could be different things. Happy with this whole section here though. Pretty happy with the mana as well. I guess we also have the Troll, so we had slightly more than I was thinking before as far as mana sources go, and the Soul Ring. So 17, 22, 23, 20, 25 mana sources there. It's actually quite a lot. So I'm starting to talk myself into that keep game 3 against Toast was actually fine, but again, happy with the deck. I'll probably try this again at some point in the future, but maybe swap out some of these cards and go from there. Alright, thanks for tuning in. Any comments, suggestions, ideas, likes down below are all appreciated, and thank you for tuning in.